Hi everybody, it's November the 30th, which means it's time for the official launch and release of The Blood Miles, the book I've been working on in secret, or semi-secret, for the last 3 or 4 years. I wanted to do a bit of a Q&A to try and introduce the book to you and tell you a little bit about why I wrote it and how I wrote it. So I typically describe The Blood Miles as Pilgrim's Progress meets Mad Max, which I think is about right. Though maybe there's a bit of Maze Runner in there too by the end of the book. Basically, it's a homage to John Bunyan's classic, but it sets the action in a post-apocalyptic wasteland that has survived a failed rebellion and also a devastating plague. Within that, it tells the story of a young man who's travelling through the ruin, trying to find some relief from the disease. Well, I've got a long and grateful history with the Pilgrim's Progress. I found it to be a great source of encouragement when I was going through hard times when I was younger, and I was sort of refreshed in my appreciation as I read it to my own children when they were little. I love so many things about the Pilgrim's Progress. I love the way Bunyan dramatises the Christian journey and paints it as a struggle and a fight. I love the way we see Bunyan's own internal turmoil in sections such as the Valley of Humiliation and the Castle of Giant Despair. Well, I should say first off that The Blood Miles isn't trying to replace Pilgrim's Progress by any means. Pilgrim's Progress is a great story for all generations. But Pilgrim's Progress is also, to some extent, a product of its context as well as a timeless tale. Some of the things that happen in it are particular to England in the 17th century, and some of the characters and experiences described are autobiographical reflections of Bunyan's own life. And the allegorical form, I think, too, is something that's from another time. So I thought it might be okay to try to write a homage for our context and our time. Still partly allegorical, but a bit more like a modern story. The Blood Miles reflects struggles that are particular to our age, wrangles over nature and identity, for example. It has hints of things that sound like prosperity religion. It tries to show the futility of so many of our contemporary disputes and quests. Well, I don't want to give too much away, but the Blood Miles equivalent of Vanity Fair is riven with fights between revolutionaries and corporate interests and conservative dissidents outside the city. But by the end of the story, we find out that everyone is in the same boat, actually, and that the problems are much bigger than anyone has realised. Firstly, Bunyan was an introspective and introverted character, and the first part of Pilgrim's Progress, where it's just a Christian on his own, really reflects that. Well, I'm sort of like that too, and the Blood Miles partly expresses a similar thing. Chris Walker gets himself into a lot of unnecessary trouble because he likes to be on his own a bit too much. I guess there are other characters that have come out of my own experience and reflections too. There's a shepherd in the mountains who is based on a late preacher that many Australian readers would know. The figure of Eve the evangelist channels my mental picture of one or two student workers I've known. And there's an older couple who have just given up the journey and settled into a well-stocked bunker. And I guess as I write that, I'm reflecting on my fears of where my life might go if I'm not careful. I think I was partly preaching to myself as I wrote The Blood Miles. I need the same things that Chris needs: grace and friends and the transforming word and continual interventions from God. There's room for a sequel. There are more stories to be told in The Blood Miles, but it's also written to stand on its own. I guess we'll see how it goes down the track. Yes, I would. Here's one of my favourite moments from the first part of the book. Chris has been captured by a bunch of technomaniacs who've been using him as a lab rat. They've stuck him in a cage and injected him with something that makes him colourblind. But at the same time, while he's in the cage, he begins reading a book produced by the central government. It gives him a vision of the world as it was before, and it also has some unexpected effects on him too. I'll read it from The Blood Miles. After I had woken up from my post-injection sleep, I sat on my mattress and began to read from the road book. It opened with a description of the Autonomous Zone, the Western Territory, as it was called then, before the war. Its river systems, fish species and hardwood forests. It itemised the production sectors, the wheat yields, wool clip and grape harvest. It spoke about populations and railways and hospitals and annual rainfall. And for as long as I was reading the book, my thoughts, which had been constantly buzzing in my head, became still. I thought of thunderstorms and the smell of the rain on the warm earth. I imagined people travelling for miles and miles, free, unmolested, in cars and trains, past sheep and cattle and ripening fields. I thought of what it would have been like to have friends in other towns, to be able to go east to the great city itself. When I looked up after reaching the end of the chapter, I was surprised to see that my sense of colour had returned. I'm really hoping and praying that people find the Blood Miles an encouragement in their faith and in their journey. I found it encouraging as I was writing it and thinking about it. And I've also heard from friends who've read it who have also been encouraged and stimulated to think about the way their lives are going and the way and what it looks like to be a Christian in our contemporary context. So I'm praying that lots of other people find that too. The Blood Miles is out in a whole lot of different formats. Firstly, as an ebook, both Kindle and EPUB for other ebook readers. It's also out in physical form, paperback and hardback, and it will shortly be released as an audiobook for Audible and other audio platforms.